This is the Headless Marketing Show. Hi, I'm Alex Belding, the co-founder of Webrick. Welcome to the Headless Marketing Show, a podcast all about digital marketing and e-commerce with a focus on emerging marketing technologies and methods. In each episode, we talk to marketing leaders as they outline their thoughts and visions around modern marketing and the future of the web. If you are interested in building great customer experiences online and creating strong digital marketing strategies, then this is a podcast you don't want to miss. Today's podcast is brought to you by Webrick and Webrick Studio. With Webrick Studio, you can deliver relevant content to your customers right when they need it. Create effective digital experiences with Webrick Studio today and stop using one-size-fits-all solutions and instead use a composable and customizable page builder, custom and tailor-fit to your organization. Learn more about Webrick Studio at webrick.com. Be sure to subscribe to this show wherever you find your podcasts. Today on the show, we're going to be talking to Brian Rinaldi. I was super excited to have Brian on the show. He is a developer experience engineer. He has been heavily involved in the Jamstack ecosystem. He actually produces a monthly newsletter called Jamstacked. He has written a book or two on Jamstack and was just a really fun guy to talk to and get his insights on what it is, why developers everywhere are excited about this, why marketers should really be paying attention to this new architecture and methodology for deploying digital experiences. All in all, the conversation is great. He has great points about why marketing should care, why this is done, and just a really insightful conversation that I think you, the listener, will get a lot out of. So thank you so much and enjoy the show. Hi, Brian. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Alex. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for coming on today. I'm really excited to talk to you, particularly because you are, kind of a major person in the Jamstack ecosystem. And
major.
you run a nice newsletter. You're a developer advocate.
Thanks.
You're involved, right? And You've got a book coming out. For folks that have never heard the phrase Jamstack or, might have just be beginning to discover Jamstack, what is Jamstack?
So Jamstack is basically, it's like an architecture or a methodology about how you build sites. And I think for this being the Headless Marketing Show, it's particularly relevant to people doing, using headless CMS or headless e-commerce and things like that, because it does have that separation of the front end, which is generally built using a static site generator which generates static assets that can be pulled from content from a headless CMS or content from a headless e-commerce, and then you use APIs to talk to those things as well on the front end to kind of build out your site, with the goal of being, it's a better overall experience. You have more control over the look and feel of the entire thing. You have it's faster because it's all static files that can be served from a CDN, which like content delivery network, which is, basically there's these file servers all around the globe that are, choose the one that's closest to you. It's not a web server, so it's just serving you static assets, and it can be blazing fast. Then it's more secure because you don't have a database, you don't have an application server. There's all these benefits you get from that. I know probably you've talked about the benefits of a headless approach in general. All of those generally apply as well to the Jamstack, because that's kind of one of the key points of building a Jamstack site is your back end and your front end are separate.
Okay. And when you said it was like an architecture or a methodology, what do you mean by that?
So yeah, when the term was, I'll give you a little bit of history that might help.
Okay, perfect.
When I started building these things back in it was 2013 using which is a static site generator built on
Mm-hmm.
Ruby.
Yep.
It was one of the kind of early ones that really popularized using a static site generator. Um, and especially because it was built into GitHub Pages, so you could build sites using that are deployed to GitHub Pages, even back in 2013 using Jekyll. Um, but this was purely like just static sites. That's why we called them static sites. In
Right.
fact, I wrote a book back then called Working with Static Sites, because it really was, while the sites were dynamically built, so it used templates and other kinds of content in Markdown or in data files to generate the site. The end result was purely static.
Mm-hmm.
And then things started to change with things like headless CMS, with other APIs and services like your Algolias and your Cloudinaries and all that other stuff, starting to kind of allow you to add more dynamic capabilities into these sites, but we were still calling them static sites. And
Right.
so so it kind of became a bit of a difficult selling point because people thought, well, this is really isn't going to fit my what I want to build because it's just for static sites, right? Like it's just for like your blog or your kind of simple marketing page, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
and and so around I think it was 2016, I believe, um, the folks at Netlify came up with the term Jamstack, which was trying to change the narrative a little bit because it was changing it from static sites to something that wasn't necessarily static. Jamstack originally was based on an acronym of JAM, which was JavaScript APIs and Markup, and those were kind of the fundamental pieces of this concept in their minds. And that was, again, I think that we had a lot of success changing the narrative around it beyond just, hey, we're doing more than building static sites. We're doing something completely dynamic, even if it's using static assets, right?
Right. Yep.
Um, yeah, and kind of fast forward 5 years, and that JAM acronym has kind of gotten in the way because it is not really a stack, and that's why I call it a methodology or an architecture. It's not a stack. A stack is usually very prescriptive, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
you think of LAMP stack as like, it tells you exactly, the acronym tells you exactly the technologies you want to use. Whereas Jamstack is like, yeah, you might use a Go based static site generator with, you might use some JavaScript on the front end. You could use, all the pieces are like kind of like, that's 1,000 different ways to do this. And every one of them is correct. So it's not a stack in a traditional sense. JavaScript APIs and markup sounds like it could apply to, honestly, any site. Is like, so people started being like, oh yeah, my site's Jamstack. I use JavaScript. I call APIs, and I mean HTML is markup. So like I'm Jamstack, and everything
Right.
is Jamstack. And then kind of like to paraphrase what The Incredibles: if everything's Jamstack, nothing is, right?
Right.
Um, so yeah, so I if you look at the site now, like jamstack.org, they stopped capitalizing that acronym because
Well,
it's
I
not
remember when
really an
that
acronym anymore.
happened.
Yeah,
Right. I remember when that happened, and it was like, wait a minute, are we supposed to capitalize the A and the
yeah,
M, or is it, and a very
yeah.
subtle change, right? A very subtle
It was
change.
it was a subtle change but it was important because it's not. We're trying to get away from that JavaScript APIs and markup, which kind of really isn't descriptive enough and is kind of overly generic, to it is more of a methodology or an architecture. It's a way of building sites that I mean, JavaScript APIs and markup still play a part, but that's not the kind of critical aspect to
Right.
it.
The critical aspect being that we're, getting away from singular web servers and,
Yes, the
we're trying
monolithic,
to,
yeah,
right.
approach.
Well,
Exactly.
and you mentioned LampStack, which people may or may not be aware of, but that's kind of like how, more database centric websites work at this day and age, right? Like WordPress or Drupal, for example. You need
Right.
a Linux operating system. It has to be an Apache server. You need MySQL and PHP. If you don't have those things, the stack literally falls apart. Whereas with Jamstack, right, you have way more choice, right? Like that's kind of the
Yeah.
concept you'd like to. So, you actually, when we were talking earlier, you had said, I really want people to stop saying JavaScript APIs and markup. And is it
Yes.
particularly because because it is too general or it is
Yeah.
too prescriptive?
Yeah, because it's too broad. It applies to almost any site that, can be JavaScript APIs and markup. So I feel like it doesn't, the acronym should, if it was useful, it would give you a clearer idea of what this is. And in
Mm-hmm.
this case, I actually feel like it leads people down a path that they don't understand. They're like, oh my create React app is Jamstack, and it's like, well, it could be. Is it all server side rendered? Yeah, it is. Then no, it's not. That's not
Right.
Jamstack. It should be
Right.
pre-rendering is kind of like a critical component to me, um,
Mm-hmm.
of the Jamstack. So your server side rendered app is not Jamstack, even if it uses JavaScript APIs and markup. So that's why I kind of feel like, we'd be better off dropping the acronym. And I guess it's not just me. That's why even, the the
Yeah,
folks
the
at
organizing
Netlify,
body, right? Yeah,
yeah,
the Jamstack.org dropped it, right? Yeah.
yes, yeah. So
Well,
yeah,
so then in the word Jamstack, how do you propose, kind of opening up the definition, or maybe because one of my arguments has always been that Jamstack it's so hard to conceptualize if you're not a developer, and even if you are a developer, like do you feel that like there needs to be a prescription to it, or does it just need to start to like define the concept, or does the word need to change entirely?
yeah, it's been a big debate lately. I think we have built a community and a lot of things. Sometimes, the words aren't perfect, but but they have kind of a value anyway, right? So I think there's
Mm-hmm.
value in the word because it has been around for a while. We've built a good community around it. And there's Jamstack conferences and Jamstack meetups and Jamstack books,
Right. Yep.
and
Exactly. Yeah.
and Jamstack newsletters, which is another thing I run. So like, you know, um, so all of those kind of things that organized around the term are huge value, even if the term itself is problematic in some ways. And I always said, like, I haven't come up with a better term anyway. I didn't. I actually remember when they told me about the term when they were creating it, and I'm like, I'm not really sold, but I don't have any better ideas. And
Yeah.
I think
What
my
is
that opinion hasn't changed now 5 years later. Not really sold, but I don't know. I don't have any better ideas. So,
yeah.
um,
Well, and I like kind of how you maybe defined it a little bit earlier, right? It's a methodology. It's almost like an ethos or a belief system versus a prescribed way of it has to be done this way, which is probably why it's gotten so popular, because there's so much choice involved. You're
yeah,
not so you're not so stuck in like the same workflow every time, right?
yeah, and I think okay, thinking about this from both a developer's standpoint and from a marketer's standpoint. That flexibility is critical, I think, to the whole concept, right? From developer standpoint, whatever I could use, whatever languages and tools I like to build this thing.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think last I checked, there's like something like 340 static site generators out there.
That many.
Yeah, I mean,
Wow.
not so many that are like kind of in use constantly, or develop. So I'd say it's a much smaller number, but there are a lot out there, and there's
Mm-hmm.
more kind of coming every day.
Right.
So that can lead to a bit of difficulty getting started because it's like, well, where do I even start, right?
Right.
But it also in the long run is one of the strengths because it's like, well, you can choose the path that suits you and you and your team best. And from a marketer standpoint, it's also like, okay, I'm not tied to like a system like WordPress, and like I talk to my developers, and I mean I love WordPress. I'm not meaning to like diss on WordPress, but it's like one of the things that always happened with WordPress and is like, well, can we do this? And like we added like 1,000 different plugins, number one, so it got a little bloated and complicated. And then, on the other end, it's like, well, you tell the developers, I want it to do this. It's like, they struggling to kind of get the WordPress system to like do exactly what they wanted, writing all this kind of convoluted PHP code / WordPress code, so, and I'd say like with every monolithic CMS or system like that, you tend to kind of be trying to fit we're going to build the site that the system allows us to, not the site that we necessarily 100% wanted to build in every way. We often work around the limitations of the system, whereas that headless approach allows me to like separate that content from how I display it. I can do a lot of things that I wasn't able to do before, which is like my front end, whether it's a website or a mobile app or whatever, can be however I want it, and it doesn't have to use, kind of work within whatever system, to function. But then also I can do a lot of things I hadn't really done before, like reuse content on my mobile app that I have on my website, or even reuse content across my website, which was always a problem. Like we have, this copy that's on the homepage, and that copy is repeated on another page, and I can't reuse all those pieces, right? Like, because if I update one, now I have to update wherever that is everywhere else, and now instead with a headless system, I can create like reusable components that I can drop in different places and update once, and it updates everywhere.
Which is a huge deal, especially from a marketing perspective. I mean, that doesn't affect the developer in the slightest. Well, maybe, just in having to like manage templates, but it really helps, the content publishers and the storytellers, focus on creating content and putting it where it needs to go, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it makes, so I'd say in the long run, it makes marketers' lives better. It's a difficult transition sometimes, and I think it's getting better. One of the difficulties Jamstack had from this standpoint early on was that, if I got used to a more monolithic CMS, for instance, I could make my change, I could preview that change. Okay, this is what's going to look like. Now I'm going to publish that change, and all that would happen like that, right? And then, and then you moved to Jamstack. It's like, okay, I made my change. Can I preview it? No, sorry, you can't preview it because it has to run a build.
It has to be built, right?
And then deployed for you to preview it. And then by the way, that build and deploy process takes a few minutes. And so you're gonna have to wait. And then you see, oh crap, I misspelled something. Like, how do I now got to go fix it, and and wait for that build, and et cetera. And it was difficult. Now, that was not a few years ago.
Yeah, I was gonna say that's no longer necessarily that way. Yeah,
exactly. Now it's completely changed. Where a lot of the static site generators and the CMSs have tools for previewing staged content. They have workflows that make it much easier. They have we have a lot of static site generators have ways of basically deploying that, like that will take a matter of seconds instead of waiting minutes, and all kinds of things like that really have made that whole workflow much smoother from a marketer's standpoint. And I think then they can really kind of focus on the benefits, all those other benefits we were just talking about, instead of being frustrated that like, now, we moved to this new system and now I can't make changes immediately, and, and I have to wait and stuff like that, which was frustrating. And it was harder to kind of see past that and enjoy all the other things that it allowed you to do.
Right. Well, and back to like the original question, what is Jamstack? Like you kind of said something earlier that completely relates to this, which is you have to pre-build the website and deploy it statically
Yes.
That's a core element of Jamstack. Whereas if you're on WordPress, right, like the website builds itself for every visitor. So of course it's really easy to see your changes in real time and preview immediately because the website is not pre-deployed, it's server side, right? And so
Absolutely.
and I remember a lot of those frustrations, back in, 18, 17, where people were like, wait a minute, the whole website's broken. I published. Where is it? I don't see anything. Right. And like,
Sure.
and now I've been amazed at how quickly publish, preview works. I mean, it's like very, very fast. And like you don't necessarily have to rebuild the whole website. Because that was another one where like we had some customers that had, a lot of pages and you have to rebuild the whole blankety blank thing. It'd be like a 25-minute wait sometimes. Yeah. And now you don't have to necessarily publish or rebuild the whole thing, right? You can, especially with some of these, like Next, I know that's a capability there that you can just...
as well, yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. And now, that publish will take, 2 minutes. And and with preview, not necessarily a big, huge problem, right?
Yeah. That's definitely true. Absolutely. And you don't, it's easy to forget the other problems that we always used to deal with and just kind of accept, I think in many ways with, I've run a number of sites on, with a monolithic CMSs, like, often WordPress, and everything seems easy. Getting a WordPress site up and running is actually like extremely easy. It's like kind of I think the ideal process. I mean, getting even a non-technical person can get a WordPress site up and running, but then you start to hit some of the limitations. As an example, like what you're saying, like, I mean, I don't know how many times I got called because we have database connection errors or, things like that, like, or the site hit a ton of traffic and now it's not responding. And then there are ways to solve those in WordPress. I'm not saying you can't do this stuff in WordPress, but or Drupal or whatever you're using, but they're hard problems to solve because okay, now we're going to add a whole caching layer and we have to build out that whole system to cache all this stuff, and then now we had to add things to kind of manage when we make those updates to kind of just track, clear that cache so that the update actually shows, and then all these things it's a solvable problem, but it's not an easily solvable problem. Whereas with Jamstack we don't have that. I mean, for instance, one of the things I love about the Jamstack is if I deploy, if I put my site to, I check in new code and somebody screws something up and it doesn't build, well, that deploy there's no interim state where that site is down.
Right.
Like either it builds and the new site is up and the old site is gone, or it doesn't build and the old site just stays up. And nothing fails, and there's no point during which somebody goes to the site and sees like, something's going on, they're updating the site. It's either new or it's old. Like there's no like,
right,
the site is in the process of being updated, right?
Yeah.
Those are great things. I think you can tie it into other systems that like make it really easy to kind of time in your when you want to deploy new features and things like that. You can you can have like branch previews, so I can always see, like I can see, let me show you what, here the developers are working on a new version of the site that does something else or looks different or whatever, and I can immediately show that to you on branch previews and things like that. So there's a lot of benefits there, I think, if both from a development standpoint and from like the ability of the marketing team to be, or whoever's maintaining the site or posting the content to kind of work together with the development team and have a really good experience.
Yeah, well, and kind of to an earlier point that you said in the call, or in the show, I should say, you mentioned that like developers have a lot of choice to build the way they want to, and they don't necessarily have to like deal with the limitations of a system or a platform. I often joke like we don't have to bend WordPress to our will, right? We just get to create something. I had a person from the content marketer from Dooley Camille on the show, and she was saying, like, as a marketer, I really want my developer team to be able to do their best work, right? And like that's something that I think is a really nice concept of the Jamstack is, maybe it was originally designed and deployed and kind of thought up to, that phrase by developers for developers.
Hmm.
But that actually is a great thing for marketing because now you're not trapped in limitations. You're not stuck in a solution that you can't work through, and you don't have these tricky problems every time you have success with your website or add a plugin. You can give your developers a lot more tools to create the experiences you as a marketer are looking for.
Yeah, exactly. And like we mentioned before, the headless systems have gotten so much more advanced. I mean, they used to
Mm-hmm.
be like just very simplistic, and now, I mean, the one of the things that I think has improved dramatically is the editing experience in the headless system, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like it used to be very bare bones. It was like, if you were used to the major CMSs, for instance, it was tough to go edit it. It's like, okay, now, even some systems are like, oh, wait, now I have to learn Markdown. That's
Mm-hmm.
not easy. I think developers tend to understate how difficult that is. They think, oh, it's easy. It's just a few Markdown's
Yeah,
just a few,
couple
you know,
commands. Yeah.
yeah. But it's like, and I always used to tell them, I'm like, no, no, I not only have to teach you all that, but like Markdown doesn't cover everything. So like, if I want to do X in Markdown that it doesn't do, now I have to write HTML, and and
Mm-hmm.
it's just so I have to teach you both. Um, whereas, I think, from a marketing standpoint or any kind of content editor, right? It's used to like a WYSIWYG type editor. They just want to work and be able to edit these things and see what it's gonna, more or less style it the way that, without having to go get into code. And they've gotten so much better at that. I
Mm-hmm.
think the editing experience now has gotten a lot better for pretty much every headless CMS I've tried. And even say like the headless e-commerce tools have gotten really, really advanced in the way that
Mm-hmm.
they manage products and all. So the distance between the experience you were used to, and the experience you can get now with Jamstack is not that far anymore.
Right. But it is worth noting, like you still have to maybe change your perception of how you'll be managing and publishing when you move from a monolithic system to something that's built in the tenets of Jamstack.
Yeah.
Because I mean they are different, right? You're managing the
Yes.
content separately from the design. You're managing, and you're just managing content, which can sometimes really confuse people. Like I want to quickly drag and drop design, not
Yeah.
necessarily the same concept as before, right?
Right. Yeah. I mean, you have whatever limitations that front end puts on you, like, oh,
Mm-hmm.
I wanna make this, change the color of this. It's like, no, 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 you can't, because you're literally not managing you're not controlling the style of it. You're controlling the in the actual content. The style is determined by the front end. So yeah, there is that. Again, those are, I think, in general, what I found in my own experience, even having been part of marketing departments, some of those, they understand kind of those limitations, because the benefit of, again, that whole idea of, well, I'm creating content that can be reused in any number of
Mm-hmm.
places. So I'm almost creating like content components that I can drop in places, as
Right.
opposed to writing pages, right? They were used to
Mm-hmm.
writing the whole page. Like, here's, I can have the title is up in the header, and then the page, all the rest of the content is now in this big WYSIWYG editor that I can just
Right.
change however I feel like. Whereas in this case, I'm editing little kind of components that are dropped in on the page.
Yep.
So I might just, this component might only be the title and the subhead, and then different pieces of it gives you a lot more flexibility in the way you design things too, but it also means I'm just editing text for the most part. I'm not basically determining how that text is presented. other than say like bold and those kind of things, obviously. But like, I'm
Hmm.
not going to be adding, changing the color, or I don't know what else, like other kinds of styling elements that they might have been used to having some flexibility on, and now they lose that. Um, and the way you think about it, again, like you said, is different too, right? Because I go in and I'm not looking at the pages. I'm looking at piece components of content, right?
Right. Hmm.
So like it doesn't necessarily translate to like, oh, hey, this is the homepage. These are like elements of the homepage.
Hmm.
And sometimes when you go into those CMSs, at first that can be a little overwhelming because it's like,
Yeah.
okay, how do I edit the homepage? It's like, okay, which part of the homepage do you want
Yeah.
to
What
edit?
section do you care about? Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, your mental model has to shift a little bit, but I think um, in the long run, those benefits greatly outweigh the learning curve that you have to go
Right.
through to make that
My
switch.
experience when introducing like a new content manager to headless CMS is like once they get their bearings,
Yeah.
it's then they love it. They're like, "Oh my gosh, this is the way I should have been publishing for forever." Like this is great because I can just edit one content element and it updates all 17 design sections that are incorporate that content element, right? So they love the speed, they love the flexibility. Um, and you get to create a publishing experience that you want, right? Versus always being stuck in pages.
Hmm.
You can publish the way you want, and kind of in the same way that the front end is completely customizable and changeable and decoupled from the content. The
Hmm.
content editing experience is no holds barred, right? Like we can publish the way we want to publish to an extent, but we're not trying to constantly bend something to our will, or we
Yeah.
edit this page and then we edit that page, and then you
Yeah.
have a ton more control over how you publish your content.
Yeah. And
Once you kind of change your mind, right? Or not change your mind, but become oriented to that new way of kind of viewing content, right?
right. And I think every marketing team, for instance, they want their pages to I want to be able to design them in a way that's unique and is going to stand out. And you have so much more flexibility doing it this way, as opposed to building out just pages the way with a single blob of content.
Mm-hmm.
So you can make this look and feel however you want, so that's important to them.
Mm-hmm.
SEO is obviously really, really important to them, and better performing pages get better SEO. And that's kind of a strength of the Jamstack, is that blazing fast performance, which should help improve your SEO and your overall like customer experience, which is something marketers care about greatly. So like I
Mm-hmm.
think they understand all that. Um, it's the
Well, and to
technical.
talk
There's a
about
lot of technical details involved underneath, but it's like that's not really important, right?
well,
In
and
terms of
like
the benefits.
a lot of marketers don't necessarily have all the technical workings of SQL and PHP either, right? Like
Right.
they want, but you hit on something that I think is often brushed off in like, oh my goodness, this is complicated. It's Jamstack. It's new. Are we going to put our trust in that? But performance, speed, is, I mean, like every time that this comes up, like it's demanded, right? Like it has to happen. Like we need faster experiences,
Hmm.
and customers want it. Marketing teams want it. Developers want to, have the sites they're working on perform. In your, can you kind of walk through why the Jamstack is so screaming fast as opposed to, monolithic systems like WordPress or Drupal or whatever?
Yeah, definitely. And I think it goes to two different pieces that are kind of fit together. The first is, as we mentioned, this kind of concept of pre-rendering, right? So as opposed to like a server-side monolithic CMS or e-commerce system, right, where you hit the page, it sends a request off to the application server. The application server then, will get information from the database and assemble this page and then send the request back to the user. that this essentially, when you hit a Jamstack site, there is no web server. It's just a CDN. So basically, it's like a file server because the assets are static, and it just goes and it serves up, say, like the HTML, JavaScript, CSS files as static assets from a CDN. So it's like they're usually CDNs by nature are distributed. So it's going to be like if I'm calling this website from Japan, for instance, I'll hit a CDN somewhere in Japan, probably, that's going to serve it way faster than going off to an application server that's in the United States, for instance. Number one, there's no database involved, which is often like when I built, these sites, the database is the bottleneck
Right.
in terms of the speed. So there's no database involved as well. Then, so these and serving static files is blazing fast. There's not everything is pre-rendered. That's the other key point, right? Like, so even though I may use a headless CMS, if that's going to be static like that on my homepage, I don't need to re-render that every time a different user comes necessarily. There may be like bits and pieces that I need to update on the client, but like the main content, say in my hero section, is going to be the same for every user, right? So that gets pre-rendered. It may be coming from a headless CMS, but it's at build time when the site gets built, that content gets pulled in, and that page gets the HTML and CSS and so on get deployed to the CDN. So like it's not calling out to any database to get that stuff. Since it's serving up a static file, it's going to be really, really fast. And so all those things, the pre-rendering and the CDNs, kind of deploying to CDNs, are the two key pieces that make it really, really fast.
Well, and like I always try to explain to folks, and what you've kind of alluded to, right, is that in a Jamstack world, the headless CMS is not actually an element of deployment, right? It is when you publish, but it's once published, visitors do not query or touch the CMS like they do in a monolithic system, which is why, when you hit publish on a WordPress, it's immediate, right? Because every person that visits the website is getting a brand new website built for them, versus here we're pre-building. And then I think the other reason page speed that you maybe, with the CDN and the pre-rendering is maybe not as clear to listeners, is that the traffic load, you can put a lot more traffic on that website a lot easier, and you don't have necessarily the slowdown that can happen if, every visitor is, having stuff delivered to its server side.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. Like there's not, an application server like your PHP server or whatever, is going to, by nature, the more requests, and that's why we talked earlier about putting a caching layer. This is part of the reason why, big sites that use these tools will put like a very complex caching layer on top to kind of essentially do similar to what the Jamstack is doing. They're getting a static version that's cached, right? And so, the application server is going to slow down, and again, the database as well, because usually there's some limit on your database connections, and things start to slow down the more traffic you get. Whereas it's not like there is no slowdown for CDN, right?
Right.
There's not, because it's just serving up static files. There's no processing really involved. And again, you're not hitting the same. All these people are not hitting the same server. They're hitting whatever CDN is closest to them. So there's really no performance hit involved there. Definitely. So I think what you're talking about is it scales kind of infinitely without the performance hit.
Right. And without the DevOps headache of like, okay, we just updated our whole website. We got to recache everything. Like historically, right? Like marketers were like, hey, we want to retheme the entire brand, and and your DevOps team was like, oh no, whereas on the Jamstack, oh great, let's do that. Absolutely. It makes it so that iteration is better and your performance is immediate. You feel it out the box versus, a lot of complex work that, may or may not be obvious to the marketing world, definitely happening with, WordPress or Drupal or even Joomla to that extent, right?
Right.
And then, like a lot of times, like you mentioned something that I wasn't going to bring up, but it's a nice segue into like our homepage can have, content for all users, or our homepage could have content for specific users. Does Jamstack offer marketing people an easier crack at personalization? Because that's one of the
Yeah.
buzzwords in the marketing world right now.
So personalized content, generally speaking, and there are exceptions to this, but generally speaking, personalized content is going to happen on the client, right? Meaning
Mm-hmm.
that we're going to use JavaScript to call some like API to get my user info and display that. There are a number of like tools even within the Jamstack community, like I'm trying to remember the name of one of them. That even I know Algolia has tools for like personalizing content based on users. Another company named Uniform has personalization tools. So there's a lot of even tools if you want to get into stuff that allows you to do some degree of serving up personalized content, or Algolia will serve up like personalized results from
Mm-hmm.
the searches that you can use to populate different pieces. Um, but yeah, I mean, I've run any number of sites, and obviously that, your site, yeah, Jamstack supports having users authenticate and then having users be able to access certain pages or having user specific content on those pages. You deal with it a little bit differently than you would on the monolithic site, but like from a technical standpoint, but yes, it completely supports that. There's a whole array of tools designed to work with the Jamstack specifically towards adding all kinds of dynamic and personalized content.
Right. Well, and you can do the personalization in a more serverless way. And so some
Yes.
of the limitations of server-side rendering and server-side builds, and then you add in the complexity of personalization. I mean, if you have a personalized landing page, but it takes 7 seconds for that personalized content to arrive, you don't have a landing page that's working, right? Whereas Jamstack, you can probably, you know, because of the performance aspect, not only deliver personalization but deliver it faster.
Right. Yeah. And so in that case, you would deliver a static version of the page that has
Mm-hmm.
the non-personalized elements already populated. And then once it hits the client, right, like it would call out again, like you said, to a serverless API of some sort. Um, that might be a function you wrote, or it might be an API like a different service, and it would call out to get that personalized content and populate that. Now, I mean, it sounds like that's a lot, but all this happens so quickly that the user generally doesn't even
Doesn't
notice that it's
notice.
happening.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Well, and an API is more scalable. It's faster. I mean, it can do more generally, right? I
Yeah.
mean,
Well, and not just that. One of the things that I personally love is I don't have to develop all these things, right? Like I don't have to
mm-hmm.
create them all from scratch, right? So I can't remember how many times in my developer career I built an authentication system, like because we would store the users and all their info in the database, and I had to build a whole system for signing up, for get retrieving your passwords, for updating your info, blah blah, all this stuff, and it's just like it's not a necessarily super easy problem to solve. Then you add in like logins, like, oh, well, now our users want to authenticate with Facebook or with Twitter or whatever, and
Mm-hmm.
now you have additional things you have to support, and so these are not easy problems to solve, but they're already pre-solved. Why do that? Why do all this stuff from a developer standpoint, but even from a marketer standpoint? It's like, why are we going to resolve this and then deal with maintain? We're not our team is not authentication experts, you know.
Right. Yeah.
Um, and so go ahead and use like an Auth0 or an Okta or a Netlify identity that has already done this work for you, and has those integrations with Facebook or with Twitter or whatever you want to hook in, right? Or even like your single sign-on or your magic link and all this other stuff
Right.
that like people want to add. It's just like, okay, done. I just call
Yep.
that API and everything's done for me. I've also moved away from, like, say, in this case of um, the user information and authentication, like I'm no longer housing any of their personal information on our internal servers. All
Right.
these companies deal with all those issues of, like, what do you call it? All the legal issues around
Yeah,
storing personal
GDPR and
information.
the right
Yeah.
to be forgotten. Right.
And so we don't need to mess with that, taken care of. And it's, from a developer standpoint, super easy to implement. So, I, I guess my point is, I focused on authentication, but like my point is all those things are pre-solved pieces. And so many of them already exist that it just means we can use pre-built things that are specialized for those purposes. Like I mentioned Algolia earlier. I love Algolia. I don't have to build search anymore. I mean, that's, how great is that? Because it was a pain to do right, and to do well, and to manage, updating the index and just it's not the easiest thing in the world, and it's done and it's so easy. So we can speed up our development and make features faster and have integrations that the marketing team wants, that, like, I mean, how awesome is it? Like, you could go, hey, we want to support, like, our users want the magic links, and we have this whole, process of, like, retrieving your password, blah, blah, can we just send them magic links, for signing on? It's like, yeah, done. Yeah, go into the
Yeah.
settings and boom, allow for magic links. And it's like, yeah, we added that feature,
Yeah.
so
And we did it in 20 minutes. Right. Yeah.
yeah. Yeah, I mean, it might be more than 20 minutes, but yeah,
Right.
more or less. Yeah, sometimes it could be just turning on a flag and say, yep,
Right.
here, it works
But we
now.
don't have to go into we don't have to approach the basement of the tech stack and like build out from the bottom.
Exactly.
We can
So,
plug, because like, I think that's, earlier you were saying, like, one of the, that you've really watched the Jamstack evolve with the growth of all the microservices. I think that's another reason that a lot of people are afraid of the Jamstack originally, because they're like, oh, well, can I just plug stuff in? And in the marketing world, a plugin is just that, right? It's just it's like an outlet, right? And it works, right?
yeah,
And in the development world, like, well, that's not necessarily how a plugin works, and it's a huge problem to the stack, and it can cause all kinds of problems if it doesn't work well. But with an API or like just a microservice like that, it can be implemented faster. And then it's also just a less of a headache on the maintenance side of things. If there's a problem with it, it won't screw necessarily the whole website over, when you go to, like it could when they're built into the basement of the system, right?
yeah. Or like, yeah, when your developers are maintaining this, and they're like, oh, yeah, oh yeah, that was a bug. We will give us a few weeks and it'll be fixed, kind of
Yeah.
thing. So yeah, and they don't have to be experts in things that they may not be experts in. They're experts in building the site, making it do what you want, but like they don't have to be authentication experts. They don't have to be search experts. They don't have to be, image manipulation experts. Say if I want to use Cloudinary or,
Right.
I mean, whatever it is. I mean, there's so many different pieces that it's like I am really grateful to having found Jamstack, because I don't want to have to build these things again. They're not fun to build, and I just never want to have to build them again if I don't have to.
Right. Well, and like I sit on a couple of Facebook groups that are like WordPress developer oriented, and every day it's like, the client asked for this. How do I do it? I have no idea. I'm out of my depth, right? Whereas like, oh, with Jamstack, just find an API that you can toss in there, and find a system that's got their pros on the team, and you don't have to go make it work because it's been done for you, and it's a best in breed tool versus some homegrown solution sitting on an app somewhere, sitting on the server.
Absolutely.
Yeah. Well, this has been really fun to chat with you about Jamstack, and kind of hopefully kind of better describe what is capable and why the marketing world should really consider and pay attention to Jamstack. You had mentioned earlier that you're publishing a book. Is it will marketers find that useful? Is it for developers? What's the book about?
So yeah, it's called the Jamstack Book. It's from Manning, and it is more of a developer focused book by more. I mean, like entirely, it's going to teach you how to build this stuff. Um, so it'll give you the code and walk you through the
Mm,
steps of building it. So, I mean, we do cover a lot of kind of the ecosystem of Jamstack and try to be a little bit different than say other books that come to you with like, oh, here's how to do, the whole book is how to do, sites with Gatsby or sites with Next.js or whatever. Like we cover a lot of different tools and try to give a sense of what the ecosystem is, where the tools, what
mhm.
tools are right for what jobs, and so on and so forth. So that might be of interest to a marketer if they have a slightly technical bent, you know, but yeah, it's out. So it's on Manning. I'm finishing up my last chapter right now, but you can actually buy the book
On a
in their
pre-order?
early access program, so you get the
Yeah.
digital version of every chapter that's done so far, which is most of them.
Well,
Yeah,
you'll
so
have to share a link with me, and I'll put it in the show notes. That'd be
yeah. And another one, it's still very developer focused, but the Jamstacked newsletter, which is something I do, I do have links to a lot of things that might be interesting for like your marketers who are focused on headless and stuff like that. I do cover a lot of things about
it's a
headless
great
CMS and headless e-commerce and stuff like
it
that.
is a good newsletter. It's yeah. I read it when every time you it's helpful, right? I mean, well, and I not to like open up a whole can of worms, but there is I mean, in my opinion, there is a lot for the marketing world to learn about development. Because I mean, in this day and age with digital first and like I mean, COVID turning e-commerce on its head and just the number of things that have happened in like the last 18 months to digital marketing in general.
Yeah.
I mean it's wicked important for the marketing world to have they don't have to be technical developers that are doing that as a job, but like having a strong understanding of the playing field and how to do some things. I did a show with the VP of marketing at Strappy kind of discussing low code and like why that could be a really big solution for a lot of the quote unquote gripes that marketing might have about headless and other things, is because if they have a good understanding of how an API works and how a database works and why we're doing Jamstack, and it can make them superheroes in terms of their department and for their brand, and they don't necessarily have to rely on developers. And I always think of marketers when the developers are talking to them, hearing like on Peanuts whenever the adults would talk, wah, 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 wah. like just kind of like, man, I don't understand this. It sounds important. It sounds credible.
Yep. Yep.
And like the content manager at Dooley was saying, like we have to stop treating developers like janitors, right? And like really start to understand like these guys are artists, and like if we can understand that art a little bit better as marketing people, it makes us ask the right questions faster, get experiences put together quicker, and fundamentally, I think speed up not just the performance of a website, but the iteration cycles and putting things out to pasture faster, right? We can just ship more product quicker if we're all
Yeah.
kind of understanding.
And go ahead.
Well, I was just going to say I would recommend really getting into your book, especially because it's not, it's not like a book about that's in the weeds of Gatsby in particular, like how to set up Sanity CMS, for example. It's a more of an overview of the ecosystem, a description of the concept versus the detailed arithmetic of like a particular math problem, right?
Yep, definitely. I would say if I was to leave one last thing, like, in terms of why it would be valuable if you're a marketer to understand this, just kind of adding on to what all the things you said, absolutely true. But adding on to that, which I think may resonate with some people, is having worked in both ends of I've been in marketing and I've been a developer. marketing gets used to saying, "Oh, can we add this?" And the first answer from the development team is what? No, that can't be done.
Yeah.
But if you know your stuff a little bit, and which is like why I've been on the other end and be like, I know this can be done because I kind of know how to. I mean, I can't code it myself, but I know how it's built. So yeah, I think it can be done. You're like, well, yeah, it can be done. It's just a different, it's just going to take a little bit of time. You know what I mean? Like, but you can make yourself like so powerful in those kind of conversations where like you understand what's possible, and really can drive some of the choices that in drive some of the things that could get built in a way that you wouldn't be able to if you didn't have that knowledge.
Right. Well, and it balances the scales, right? Because oftentimes, like, there's the joke of like marketing and development being oil and water, or kind of at odds with each other.
Yeah.
And like the more marketing understands about development, and the more development on the same token can understand about marketing, the better those relationships will be. Like you say, right? Like, if you can ask the right questions and approach the request from a from a better perspective, you won't be slapped in the face with no, we're not going to do that feature. We're not interested. Like
it's not technically possible.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. I know. I've had so many conversations that started with it's not tech. It just can't be done. To like eventually like yeah, okay, it can be done. It's going to take a long time to like yeah. Oh, by the way, I finished that last night.
Right. Right. Well, and we've had customers come out to us with things, and it's like, oh man, yeah, we can do that, but we're gonna have to think about it. Like, like that's okay, right? Like, it's still, I mean, that's the fun part about being just developing cutting edge experiences is, we had a customer come to us. Can we do crypto on our e-commerce? Oh, probably, like, but we have to like think about it, right? Versus just like before, oh Christ, no, we're not interested. Like, that's going to be hard, it just, so like, that's also just like one last pitch on Jamstack is like, if your development team is on the Jamstack, they're much more open to experimentation and opening up those kinds of projects because they don't have a can of worms to deal with. They just have a much better workflow from the outset.
You're absolutely right.
Well, Brian, thank you so much for being on the show. I really appreciate having you. Folks that have listened to the end, be sure to check those show notes for, this has been a fairly technical episode, right? But I think, ultimately very informative, and really appreciate you being by today.
Thanks. This was a lot of fun. Thanks for having me.
Thanks for listening to the Headless Marketing Show. Be sure to keep coming back for more episodes and discussions with marketing leaders where we talk about e-commerce, digital marketing, and all things related to the web. Remember to subscribe to the Headless Marketing Show on iTunes, Spotify, or wherever you find and listen to your podcasts.